Diarahead soas an Tashron Machar Jane. This is a history of Scotland. In the last episode, a weakened Robert III took the throne of Scotland, but his conniving brother, the Duke of Albany, really held the power. For the first years of their reign, this imbalance held, but Robert made a number of attempts to weaken his rival. In 1395, he regained some authority and placed his son David at the head of his council, removing Albany from direct power. In 1399, his increasingly independent son convinced his father to surrender the regency on account of ill health. This placed David, the Duke of Rothesay, and his ally Archibald Douglas in charge of the kingdom and further weakened Albany's position. Only a few years later, however, Prince David was taken to Albany's castle at Falkland and mysteriously died. The Parliament ordered Albany to appear with his companions and face an inquiry into the death, but Albany was joined by the Lord Douglas, the prince's old friend. To charge Albany, the regent of Scotland, and Douglas, the guardian of the English border, would decimate Scotland's already teetering government. The Parliament meekly announced that David had died from an act of God and conferred the regency on Albany, outmaneuvering the king once again. Things went sour for Albany, however, as his close ally Douglas and his son Murdoch were captured after a horrendous battle with the English Percys. To make matters worse, the prisoners became caught in a diplomatic limbo when the Percys revolted against Henry IV. Douglas managed to return, but his unchivalrous conduct proved a headache to Albany and weakened their friendship. There was an opportunity for Robert III to rise again. Now Robert's hopes rested on his second son, James. When he heard rumors Albany planned to kidnap the boy with English help, Robert decided to send his heir to safety in France. Unfortunately, the ship was captured by pirates near Norfolk, and the boy ended up exactly where Robert tried to avoid, a prisoner of the English crown. The shock of this misfortune killed Robert III. The boy prince would spend the first 18 years of his reign in English hands. More than ever, Albany ruled Scotland. Now secure in his power, Albany assumed the reins of government and faced two threats, one to the south and one in the north. Since the time of Robert the Bruce, the clan MacDonald had allied with Scotland's kings. In 1308, the Bruce had toppled the MacDougall lords of the Isles and allowed the MacDonald friends to expand into their territory. But by the reign of James I, however, these MacDonalds had established a maritime empire far beyond Scottish control. MacDonald soldiers now controlled the Hebrides, Argyll, most of Inverness-shire and parts of Ross, Antrim and Down, and had alliances with the Norwegians of Shetland and even the English. In 1411, Donald, King of the Isles, tried to annex the rest of Ross and Aberdeenshire and separate a northern kingdom from Scotland. He met Albany's nephew, Alexander Stuart, near Aberdeen at the Battle of Red Harlaw. A single day of inconclusive fighting became the bloodiest and most vicious battle in Scotland, but managed to halt Donald's expansion for the time. Albany failed to defeat this Kingdom of the Isles, which would remain a thorn in the side of his rule and the Stuart dynasty. To the south, Albany had more success with the troubles with Douglas. The Douglases had been granted stunning authority under Roberts II and III, and Albany had been willing to tolerate their freedom when they aligned with him. Now they resisted his efforts to take further power. Led by Archibald of Black Douglas, the lords of the lowlands began to break with the crown. Albany managed a tactful marriage, strengthening his ties to Douglas, and increasingly sent Earl Douglas on diplomatic missions to France and to Burgundy. This limited his machinations in Scotland, but failed to end them. There would be a consequence to pay. As Henry V increased English efforts during the 100 Years' War, the Scots were increasingly pulled in as French allies. Under Robert II, there had been periodic raids to distract the English attention at critical moments, but under Albany's careful negotiations, the Scots took on a more material role, supplying the French with soldiers instead of fighting the English directly. On his deathbed, the great Henry V is said to have held a special complaint for the Scots. "That is a cursed nation. Everywhere I go, I find them in my beard." This more subtle approach built up Scotland's diplomatic position. The Lord Douglas received French commands and titles, while Albany's younger son was named Constable of France. The Scots gained legitimacy on the world stage, becoming a proper country instead of simply English separatists. Granted, Albany's self-interested policy allowed the earls and lords to pursue their own interests instead of the states, but the Scots did not slide backward. Under Robert II, the burghers had begun to rise in the lowlands, and merchantry revived after years of war. Economic links, particularly to the wool-spinning states of Flanders and Burgundy, brought prosperity to a country in dire need of financial security. The wealth and power assembled by Albany brought Scotland a period of relative peace and stability, even if the means to achieve it had been less than pure. After almost 20 years of unlimited rule and deft maneuvering, Robert of Albany died peacefully, passing his regency to his now liberated son Murdoch. Murdoch had spent 12 years in captivity between warring English factions, and was not as clever or ambitious as his father. The weakness of the regency was obvious, and it did not bode well. The Bishop of Glasgow and Lord Douglas approached England with an offer for the newly crowned Henry VI and his regents. During the 20 years Albany had ruled, his nephew James Stuart had remained in English hands, mostly protected from the machinations that had tossed Murdoch and Douglas himself about between Yorkists, Northumbrians, and Welshmen. James had grown up in the diplomatically charged court of Henry IV and come of age in the aggressive reign of Henry V. From these foreign tutors he learned much about kingship, and now at 29 he was the strong leader Scotland needed. In 1423 Douglas arranged a ransom for the prince, and the next year he returned to Scotland in triumph and immediately took power, executing his cousin Murdoch. In a twist of irony, it was two men Albany had trusted who were responsible for his son's death, Archibald Douglas and Alexander Stuart, the hero of Harlaw. With their arms and the wealth and prestige Albany had accrued, Scotland was ready for its first golden age, the reign of James I of Stuart, the Rex Legifer.